Hi, Sonam. Welcome to Venture with Grace. We're live.
Great. Thanks, Grace, for having me and excited for this one.
Amazing. Okay, so to start off the show, I would love for the audience to learn more about you. So you have started your career in investment banking. Why don't we start with what are some early on lessons that kind of shape you into how you invest at Conviviality Ventures?
Sure. So, I'm from Mumbai. That's where I live. Born, brought up over here. Grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. Uh, Strong focus on academics, and like most people, were good at academics. In those years, we all ended up doing engineering. So, became a computer engineer. Followed it up with a MBA in finance, and then joined the professional career with Nomura, which is a global investment bank. Did 5 years of investment banking. Great exposure because you're working across transactions with large companies, whether it's IPOs, M&As. Worked a lot with numbers, and got my basics in finance sort of really cleared up and strong. And but the most sort of key learning during banking was that I was surrounded by sort of extremely very talented, high performance individuals, very driven. So it was amazing to be surrounded by those peers, and it adds up to your ambition. And the second thing is, banking really builds a strong work ethic, because you're working a lot of hours. So all of those were really sort of formative in how it shaped my career, whether it's a work ethic, whether it's, being surrounded by highly driven people, and then, taking some of that off in my career. And then, did 5 years in investment banking, then joined RoundGlass, which was my previous organization. This is a corporate, health tech focused corporate. I was part of the CVC team, the corporate venture investing team. And it was a great opportunity because, unlike Nomura, which is an established name, this was an opportunity to build, I would say, something from scratch. It was a brand new team, investing in pre-series A, Series A transactions in the health tech space, um, in the Indian startup ecosystem. This was 2016, so the Indian startup ecosystem was, I would say, about 6-7 years old. So I was also growing with the ecosystem. Uh, was responsible for everything from sourcing to execution to diligence to analysis, and then also portfolio management. Again, got a chance to work with some great founders. Building things from scratch. There our thesis was to be sort of a significantly large institutional investor, and more often than not, we were the largest institutional investor on the cap table. So worked, very closely with the founders to build, on strategy. How do you, think about fundraising, corporate governance, and although it was focused a lot on the health tech space, there were some deals that we did in the consumer space, one in the film space as well. So pretty sort of broad exposure. And then, spent close to about 5 years there. And late 2021 is when I joined in my current role. So currently, I'm the India lead for Conviviality Ventures. This is a corporate venture capital arm of Pernod Ricard. Pernod Ricard is a large alcobev company, second largest wine and spirits company globally. We're present in 80 plus countries. Um, you've met with our teams in US, so we have teams in San Francisco, Paris, Shanghai, covering those markets, and I look after the India investments. Here we're investing in allied spaces of alcobev. So beyond our core product, which is alcohol, there are allied spaces like travel experiences, anything which can get people together. We're called Conviviality Ventures. We're named behind the global vision of our corporate called Creators of Conviviality. So what it really means is, can we transform the way people socialize? What are people consuming when they are getting together, whether it's products, services, what's the environment like? So that's the broader thesis. But what it really translates into is sectors like experiences, hospitality, travel. Um, it's been a great ride. It's been 2 years here. We have a sort of lean team, done a few investments, and experiences as a space is really sort of catching up in India. So we're very excited to double down and invest more in these kind of spaces.
Totally. I wonder when you're thinking about like building up the thesis of like, maybe we could start with like the entire like Indian culture and like as everyone probably know, like India grow like really fast. And when like I guess like a lot of times like when people are building up thesis around a um different like geolocation, people may like look at like US competitors on like what works well and then see if it'll work in the different location, vice versa. So like I wonder when you're building up the thesis, like what were your inspirations and then like what do you think like like it's so special about like the Indian geolocation that like maybe X kind of company will work versus like Y company like will not work.
Right. No, that's a very interesting question. So, and I'll use the example of how we built our thesis here. What I spoke about right now is the
Mhm.
broader thesis of Conviviality Ventures. But when we were, starting off with the India investments, obviously you need to customize and localize that thesis, for India.
Mhm.
Right? So you need to, starting from say the parent company, which is Pernod, unlike maybe US where Pernod is, amongst the top five players in that
Mhm.
market. Here, we are a market leader. So a lot of our brands, etc., are number one brands in their category. So it enjoys a very dominant position in the industry, which means we're playing from a place of strength, right? So that helps. Second thing is, the consumers consuming our products here are, I would say, uh, our products here are more premium than all the other alcoholic products present here. So is there a need to reach out to a much more discerning consumer or much more premium customer segment in India versus the whole of India? So things like these, which sort of marry what the local market wants to do, and how can and what kind of opportunities we see in the startup ecosystem, that I would say define what eventually we're going to invest in. So if you look at our portfolio, we've invested in IGP, which is a gifting focused e-commerce platform. I would say it's very different from companies that we've invested in US or Europe. But at the same time, the common theme is celebrations, right? And India is very, in just talking about the Indian culture specifically on this point, very social people. We like to celebrate, along with families and friends. So it's always large group gatherings, and we have a lot of occasions. So, for example, in the developed or in the Western world, Christmas is like one big one, but in India you have
Mhm.
smaller, or I would say a bigger occasions scattered throughout the year. You have Diwali, you have Holi, you have Rakhi. There is some occasion happening every month, and so people do get together and celebrate it all. So celebrations is definitely a sort of a key trend here. And what has happened in the past few years, as we saw, is that people are also wanting to celebrate not just Indian occasions but also global occasions. So you see Halloween parties happening here. You see people celebrating Secret Santa in offices. You'll
Mhm.
also see people celebrating Parents' Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day. So there are Indian occasions, global occasions. They want to celebrate all of it. Um, there are about 1 billion people in this country, so that just takes you to 1 billion birthdays, which means 1 billion cakes are cut, annually. And then in India, also birthdays are pretty special. So I was just speaking to another colleague at Pernod recently. He's French. He's working in the Indian office for a couple of years, and he said that birthdays back when he was in France were not that much of a big deal, but in India, you celebrate it, from morning to evening. You cut like four cakes, one with your office colleagues, one with your friends, one with your family. So
Mhm.
people do celebrate a lot, and that was a trend that we saw. And then we came across our portfolio company IGP, which is built like a full stack platform. They do everything from having their own SKUs, customize and curating great gifts, offering that on their platform, and getting customers to buy those, and then also servicing them and making sure they get it on time, delivered to their loved ones, wherever they would be, whether it's in India or globally. So we saw sort of a great product being built in a market which is obviously fast growing as India, but also in a sub market like celebrations or like gifting, which we believe, given the Indian context, culturally and socially, has sort of great wins to it, and that's maybe an example of how we've localized the thesis a little bit when you look at, yeah, a market like India.
Totally. I wonder when you're selecting like one platform versus the other, you just mentioned like it's a full stack platform. So I will maybe like add a little bit more context of like the question. So like as you know, like I worked in China and Venture. I feel like I look at like certain gifting platforms before, but based on like the consumer behavior in China, I feel like people are more leaning towards a bigger platform like a Taobao or like somewhere that like people are already having an account and familiar with. So basically the equivalent to the US is like I feel like most people would not like go on, so like a lot of people would shop on like
Mhm.
Amazon or something versus like I feel like this doesn't really apply to the US because I feel like there's a lot of Shopify store exists, but the equivalent of Shopify store is like all based on like Taobao, which is like a one platform, but like a lot of like different smaller businesses are on top of it. um
Right.
would this apply to the Indian ecosystem? Because of like I feel like the gifting a lot of times like maybe people will shop at the equivalent of like a bigger platform versus like they go off to go to a different platform. I wonder if this is like applying to the Indian market.
Yeah, no, no, very apt question. It's actually one of the key questions when we had when we were evaluating, right, the market, and like when it came to who finding out who the competitors are, right? Who
Mhm,
else can a person use to give something to their loved one? And you're right, there are these horizontal platforms like Amazon, like Flipkart, like even quick commerce today, where you get a sort of wide variety of branded or products. So if I want to give you, for example, a Stanley Cup, I can go to an
mhm,
Amazon and buy it for you and gift it to you. So there are these platforms which also solve a little bit for the gifting use case. But what we saw in this particular platform, which is IGP, is that they had figured out some insights, for the gifting market, which were very unique, and they were solving for it. The problem was that none of these other platforms were solving only for the gifting use case, whereas here they're
mhm,
primarily solving for it. So just to give you an example, one of the sort of more popular products on the IGB platforms are these heterogeneous hampers. So it's like a basket full
mhm,
of different goods, maybe
mhm.
some flowers, maybe a plant, maybe like a chocolate, maybe an Indian sweet, maybe like a customized mug, all together packaged very beautifully, and you send that as a hamper, to my sister or to a friend, right? And when they receive it, obviously there's a wow factor, so they see it and they love it. And one more important thing, which is very apt, I think, especially for the Indian consumer, that you always want to receive a gift where the perceived value of of the gift is higher than the actual value. So if I give you a Stanley Cup, you would know the price exactly. I would know the price exactly. Great. But if I give you a hamper, which in some goods where I know the price, some which are much more personalized in nature, it just, to me as a recipient, I would feel like it's a better gift, and it makes the sender go up, I would say, in terms of social points, in my eyes. So that's an example of a use case that they specifically solve for. Hampers are something that they do significantly well. A second example is, India, like I was saying, cakes. People celebrate their birthdays a lot, so I can also send cakes to, say, my sister or to a friend on their birthday. And some of these existing food delivery platforms may not have the wherewithal or like the packaging to make sure that the cake reaches in the best condition, in the best, manner, in the best wrapper to, the person whose birthday it is. And these guys make sure that they take care of all of these. So these are just some small examples where we felt they stood out, and based on the NPS, based on the customer survey, we did see that there was a differentiation or a moat that they were building as compared to the horizontal platforms. And obviously, I think the category is large, so you will always have an Amazon or Flipkart solving some part of it, but we believe there is a lot to do with personalization, curation, hampers, which is being solved at their level.
Totally. I wonder when it comes to like looking at different opportunities from like corporate venture landscape, what would be the unique insight that you were trying to like kind of like look for when it comes to um like I guess like when it comes to like evaluating compared to if you're working at like a traditional VC firm?
Sure. So, what I think I'll start with things that are common first. So one is that we also want a company which has great financial prospects, which means it should have a large enough market. There should be
Oh,
significant
sorry.
differentiation.
I feel like my question is like too general. I guess like
Okay.
it's more towards like I guess when it comes to like evaluating is there like a certain particular like benchmark from like the number perspective like since like I'm sure like in corporate venture like a lot of times it's like the company is supposed to having some sort of like collaboration opportunities between the
Mm,
startup versus like the big like mother company basically and like from that perspective as well as like maybe
yeah.
if there is a I guess like if it's like purely focusing on like the financial return, also like is there like a particular benchmark or like I guess um like for example like the download numbers or like how frequent people use compared to like like I feel like traditionally people may just judge like a particular like an overall set of numbers to see like how people
Mm.
react to it. Is there something different between like Conviviality Venture versus like a regular like company that are just like focusing purely on like financial returns?
Yeah. So, internally we have two benchmarks or two objectives that we're solving for.
Mhm.
We are solving for financial returns. That's very much a KPI that we as investors or as a team are judged against. So we need to make sure we get good returns. But at the same time, an equally important metric is strategic returns, like you mentioned. How we measure that is at a high level we aim for a partnership ratio of about 50%, so at least of greater than 50%. So all the companies that we invest in, at least 50% should have a significant interaction within the parent co. Now partnership is can take various forms. It can take anywhere between exchange of learnings and insights to actually doing a project or a pilot with them to actually having a, for example, say a joint venture or co-creating a product, right? So it could be any of these, but there is an aim to have at least 50% of the portfolio companies do something with the parent co. So that's a high level metric. And then depending on at what stage we invest, how the business of the portfolio company also pans out, after we invest. Because sometimes we do take Series A or, Series A plus bets, which means the company also has a long enough trajectory to figure out what its business model is, where it wants to focus on. So keeping all of that in mind, that's the ratio that we target for, and we aim to facilitate partnerships between the portfolio company and the parent co at each and every point in time. When we're actually evaluating the startups, though, financially we look at the same numbers that any other VC investor would, but at the same time we also evaluate as to what they could potentially do with that. With our parent co, we do some brainstorming with the founder, also with some folks from the parent co to see what could be interesting, if that particular opportunity would be interesting for them, to see if it matches our investment thesis. We need to have both of those in line before we sort of commit to an investment, for sure.
Totally. I also saw that you invest in a live social entertainment platform. Like, why don't we start with like maybe you can give the audience a little bit more of context of like what it is, as well as like how it can align with like on Reality Ventures like vision. And since you mentioned like the 50% partnerships, like, how do you see like the startup could partner with Conviviality Ventures?
Yeah. So this is the company called Lolo.
Mhm.
It's an Indian startup. We invested in the Series A round. It fits into, actually, if you look at what our thesis for Conviviality Ventures, we have different pillars. Something which is redefining retail, something which is changing the way people consume, and we have something called virtual togetherness, which was seeing how conviviality can be in an online or a virtual situation, right? So LOLO fits sort of that vertical. What this platform does is super unique. They are a social live streaming or social gaming and live streaming platform meant for Indians, and meant for Indians who are more comfortable in, say, more Indian languages versus only conversing in English. The thesis is that the top sort of, there are about 100 million Indians which are, sitting, living in large urban cities like Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi. They're present on all social platforms like Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter. And then you have, the next sort of 300, 400 million Indians, which are living in large cities, but they are more comfortable in talking in their regional languages, whether it's Gujarati or, Bengali. These are Indian languages across different states. And they also relate to influencers or micro influencers or nano influencers, which are also talking in the same language. And these guys, were not finding sort of a great fit on Instagram. Instagram, they consume passively, but they're not actively creating or interacting with their favorite influencer. So here is a social platform, LOLO. What happens on the platform is all sort of regional creators, whether it's a micro creator, nano creator, or even someone who wants to be a creator on day one, comes on the platform, hosts a live stream. And in that live stream, this person could be either just chatting, or actually playing games, which are as part of the platform. These are, again, very intuitive Indian social games like Antakshari or Tambola. These are games that we all grew up playing when we were kids. They've, sort of digitized it and put it in the platform, and it gives a way to give some sort of, base to the live stream. They interact with their followers, and, the followers sort of start, tracking the influencers' content on a day-to-day basis, and, this is a way for them to interact on the live stream. What really stood out, when we were looking at the company was that live streaming, the way, because you worked in China, that's a big concept there. They've, taken it everything from virtual gifting to commerce, and it's solved big use cases for them. But it hasn't worked anywhere else. I don't think it's worked in the US. It's definitely not worked in India from a commerce perspective. And there are multiple reasons, but here we could see that there was a significant traction and significant pain point that live streaming was solving when you get, relatable people together. So that was a thesis. We invested in them. They are focused on the next sort of, Bharat users, as we like to call them, who are more comfortable, who are middle India, middle income, and it solves for loneliness. It solves for relatability, which they don't find on English first platforms like Instagram. Um, so that's the thesis for LOLO in terms of, how Perno or, how a parent company can partner with them. Again, it was based on the same thesis. We have brands that we want to advertise or market to, everyone in India. And we are doing that through social platforms, the larger ones that I spoke about. But how do you reach to the India? Can you reach out to them through influencers, which they find more relatable, and then figure out how can the brands collaborate it on these live streams, whether it's in forms of virtual gifting or having some brand collabs done on that. So that's the thesis that we had, for LOL, and it's a great company. It's grown significantly since we invested in terms of users, and early this year, they also started monetizing. So it's a great sort of story that has come out and very unique to India, and very uniquely built also, for Indians.
I wonder, is this like a equivalent to like a Twitch? So basically people are like playing game on top of it, like, or like would it be more of like a TikTok as like not like TikTok, but like it's more of like people are going live to um like tell a story or like dance or like I feel like a mix of things.
It's the latter. Twitch
Mhm.
also, we've had platforms similar to Twitch launch in India. Again, doing well
Mhm.
because India again is home to a lot of gamers. But those are, I think, more for sort of mid-core or games which are not casual. These are casual games on LOLO. It's more like TikTok where people are singing, dancing, but they're also playing games. They're also interacting, and sometimes they're just doing a Q&A. They're just like, the followers asking them questions and they're answering the questions. They can have a topic like, uh, how to do better in like their career, or how to solve for loneliness, and the influencer talks them through it. So it's more general and it's more entertainment focused than gaming, I would say.
What are some like, I guess like what are some like benchmark that you would use to evaluate like this kind of companies? Because as you mentioned, like there is somewhat of equivalent, like,
Yeah.
people are obviously like the Indian version of like Twitch is like performing, and what do you think are like a good evaluation for these type of companies in terms of um like particular objectives?
Yeah. So, any startup which is, which is where people are spending a lot of time
Mhm.
consuming, content or creating content or sharing content versus commerce. I think, all of these you can judge by a few metrics. I sort of, split them into acquisition, how quickly you're acquiring the customers, lot of focus on organic consumption, sorry, organic acquisition, as to how many users are getting acquired on a monthly basis organically, which means people are
Mhm.
hearing of the app and then installing it. Next is
How
engagement.
I
Yeah.
I wonder, so like how do you really like doing the due diligence on like the organic acquisition? Because I feel like it could be really hard as like when people are observing the download number from like App Store, it could be people internally from the company doing something, or like I feel like sometimes it's really hard to evaluate some of these like hard metrics, like how like how people came up with it. Like, obviously, I feel like
Mhm.
this is a universal problem. It's not
Yeah.
just like a geographic or like a sector, but I wonder just like what's your like take on um like doing the diligence behind some of these um engagement metrics.
Yeah. So, just to go back and complete the previous question. So you look at
Mhm,
engagement, you look at how much time they're spending on the app, and then look at retention, how many users are coming back, etc. Coming to the question that so one is you look at these numbers when given to you by the company. You obviously build a point of view on them, figure out what's working, what's not working. And then, when you mention diligence, very important to do, your own diligence as to making sure, how to triangulate, some of these numbers with some of the other metrics that you may find based on your research or desktop research. I think, so, one is that you could, have someone do an entirely sort of detailed forensic diligence where someone actually goes through the app, goes through sensor tower and figures out what numbers are what. I think we do that in steps. One is that when we are looking at an or evaluating a company in that space, and firstly we need to be sure of what the point of view is, what the thesis looks like. Are we positive on it or not? Right, the broader thesis based on the numbers given to us by the company. If we feel all of that is working out, then we start figuring out whether let's double check and do some research on these numbers. I think one good way is to figure out, there are these other platforms like Sensor Tower, etc., which gives you numbers at least in terms of downloads. We've noticed that sometimes they're off by 10 to 20%, but they're never significantly off, and they at least give you a relative comparison. So if you have three companies in the space, you'll at least know the ranking through them, right? That's one. I think there are some ways, and also for you to figure out through the numbers themselves whether how much are they spending on acquisition per install, cost per install, is that triangulating with the numbers given to you. So sometimes the numbers, if you sort of dig deeper, tell you a story, and
mhm,
it's easy as you dig deeper to figure out what's really what. And the last thing that we generally do is we also actually spend some time at the company office, talk to different folks in the team, sometimes also go through their mixed panel, etc., to figure out where is the source of data sort of coming from, how is it flowing, and some of these sort of easy hacks to figure out whether it's working or not. I think a lot of also as a governance practice, before we actually make the investment, there are usual diligence is done, whether it's commercial diligence, financial diligence, or tax diligence, and those are again regular checks that sort of help you figure out whether everything is kosher, and this is all before you finally commit and sign on the investment.
mhm. I wonder for as for like a live stream platform or anything that's like depends on like the user engagement. Like how many hours do people normally spend on like live streaming platforms in general? And like I guess like do people how much like how many percent of like people actually would let's say like doing virtual gifting or like slash like giving money to the creators?
Right. So engagement is actually one of the key metrics why we invested in LOLO. So early on, even with, I would say, 1/10 the number of users that they have today, they had a strong sort of average engagement time of 38 minutes per session.
Mhm,
Uh, this is across the users, including the power
mhm,
average user, which we thought was fantastic. Some of the power users, also had 2 to 3 hours, and since then they've grown
mhm,
their monthly active, daily active 8x, 10x, and still, they've maintained that 38 to 40 minutes engagement time. So that's according to us super. In terms of what you spoke about gifting and virtual gifting and who's really paying, so they were actually a free platform till
mhm,
end of 2023. They started monetization only this year, and like you rightly said, it was one of the first sort of models where we were testing out something called virtual gifting. In India, there's been for the longest time there has been a belief that the middle India, or Indians living in tier 2 cities, they will not pay for digital consumption. A little bit
mhm,
of that was broken over the last 2 years when some of these users started paying for content, whether it's YouTube Premium or OTT, or all of the Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Hotstar, etc. So they started paying for that. Then you also had a lot of sort of regional focused content apps. They started paying for that, but all of that was subscription. What we really were aiming with LOLO is to see how virtual gifting picks up, how microtransaction picks up, and how whether this cohort of users is ready to pay or not.
mhm,
And the ramp up of their monetization has been fantastic. They've grown. They launched monetization in March this year, and they've grown 6x. So I think it's. I mean, we've not really done the benchmarking, but I think it's one of the fastest growing consumer tech apps in terms of revenue, to
mhm.
go from a certain run rate to a certain run rate today. So it's worked really well. Right now, it's rolled out to a limited user base, so we are seeing conversion of about 2 to 3%, I would say, of the user base paying for it. Um, but it's been results which have been more positive than honestly what we budgeted for, because before this we haven't really tested this cohort to be paying, and they're seeing some incredible results. So this just shows you that actually you can sort of translate the customer love, or the time that is spending on the app, to actual dollars. So it's really really sort of promising results, and hoping to add more monetization use cases through this year. Yeah.
I wonder, so for as for like from like a team perspective and also like maybe the go to market. So for example, like for like the China equivalent, like not like equivalent, but like I feel like for example, like the when a company goes to like the tier 2, tier 3 market, maybe
Mm.
it's like better than if they just primarily focus on like the tier 1 market, which means I guess like the tier 1 market like um typically would spend more money, but however, there's less people there compared to like the rest of the population. So, for example, like a Temu or the equivalent would be Pinduoduo in China, which is like they're very popular from like a market size. I feel like it's definitely like compared to kind of like if something only focused on like the tier 1 city, it would be like a
Mm.
better bet. However, it's like really hard to pick like which company would become the winner
Mm.
just solely based off um, like their numbers and like go to market strategies because a lot of times there's a lot of different factors. What does this look like when you're evaluating companies that are maybe they're creating something for like would you pick something that's like primarily focused on people who already have the money to spend versus like something that's more towards um like a lower end market. However, it's like more people will spend.
Right, right, right. No, very interesting question, and I think so. So in India, right, we are looking at companies playing in both spaces.
Mhm,
There are, and the macro environment is such, and if you look at the consumption numbers in India, even the ones that are focused on the top 5 to 6 million households have a large potential market. And why I say that is because um, if you look at some of the surveys that have come out, we have India is a very bottom heavy population, so we have 1.5 billion people. But
Mhm.
for people that are earning say about $35,000 GDP per capita, that's only 6 billion. But if you look at the next 5 years, this 6 million is going to grow 5x and will become a 25 to 30 million. So the growth in consumption is a little bit K-shaped, where the upper middle income and high income are growing faster than the folks at the bottom, unfortunately. So, so that means there's a lot of scope even in this market, even though I'm building a product that only talks to the top 5 million, 6 million people, because that a lot of people from the upper middle class are going to come to high income. This group will grow, and the number of times they consume and the frequency with which they consume is also going to grow. So when I'm looking at products solving for this segment, I'm looking at high AOV, so high selling prices. It has to be a deeply engaging product where the person interacts or buys the product multiple times in the year. And because this is a very discerning consumer which doesn't mind paying a little bit extra but wants the best experience, whether it's some sort of product, you can't go wrong. If you build a service, say you build a travel service, and you sell to the top 5 6 million, you have to make sure that whenever you launch, you're giving them the best product. Otherwise, it's tough to build brand equity for a long term with this period. So things like having a great product, having a very differentiated story, if you're building a consumer product, say apparel or something that stands out, and people don't mind paying a premium for quality, if as long as you have quality and you're able to articulate that. Whereas if you're building on for middle India, the scale is large, um, and a person sort of buying your product or your service will be sort of cutting off something else to be able to buy you. So you need to be solving for a very valid pain point. Here I would say the consumer may be slightly more sort of forgiving, but at the same time you need to be very clear about the pain point that you're solving for the function and the use case that your product or your service gets for that consumer, and at which life cycle that consumer is sort of coming in. The base here is larger, so if you're able to solve have a higher penetration across this, even with lesser frequency, I think that gives you a great sort of market, and it reaches out to many more consumers. So for us, both of these spaces are interesting. We have, at our parent company, we have products or brands that serve the super high end Indian, but also at the same time we have mass premium brands. So we want to be able to partner with startups in both of these categories.
When it comes to like for example, for like the people who are um going after like the high end market, like what would be like the typical people's um like income and like also like how much they're spending on like consumer services versus like call it like tier 2 tier 3 city people, how much would people actually having to spend on like consumer or like retail product each month?
So there's this theory which says that once your GDP per capita rises above a certain income,
Hmm.
uh, that additional income is always spent on services, consumer services, and discretionary services, food, and all your other basics. They don't change significantly a lot as you move up, but you
Hmm.
start spending a lot more on luxury products or travel, etc.
Hmm.
So that piece is changing. And India, like I said, because it's like K-shaped, where you have the high end, um, you know, sort of the top households spending a lot, and there's a lot of power law, I would say, for consumption in India. If you look at, our food delivery platforms like a Zomato, similar to a Meituan in um, um, China, you have like 25 million. They have about 25 million monthly active users, but I would say the top 70% of the total GMV
Hmm.
comes from the top three cities, right? Similar to all the e-commerce platforms, like you mentioned, Amazon, we have Amazon, Flipkart. Again, 50 to 60% of the GMV is done by the top 5 million households. So power law, in terms of at least consumer tech, is significantly high in India. You have the top 5 to 10 million to 15 million, depending on what thresholds that you use, consume a lot of these products or services. You know, you have again the top 5 to 10 million taking about 50 or 60% of all the flights that operate in India, whether it's domestic or outbound. So, significant power law consumption. These guys, the top 5 to 10 million, are spending a lot more on all of these products and services today. But as you know, the growth gets more broad based, we do feel like for India to sort of do well in the next decade or so, there needs to be a little bit of broad basing of consumption for sure.
Totally. I wonder when it comes to like picking the best founders. So like when like I was working in China, I feel like a lot of people were picking the people who have like some sort of like American background. Basically if they like have like went to like grad school in the US, like top US schools, or like worked at like a Goldman Sachs or like something that's like iconic like global brands. I wonder how does this kind of look like in India? Is it like kind of like similar, or do you feel like it doesn't matter? I I would also say like I feel like the most like mega success of like a lot of the Chinese founder are like maybe they just come from like locally instead of like actually having the universal background, but like maybe we're just talking about like the next generation. I wonder how does it kind of like look like in the India's like startup ecosystem, and who are like I guess like how do you categorize like where the best founders are coming from?
Yeah. No, no, I think India is very similar. So, like in China, you mentioned it's American school background, which is important. But here, a lot of, if you look at the funding stats, a lot of our founders have, degrees from IIT. I don't know if you're aware of IIT. IITs
Mhm.
are
Yeah,
a,
yeah, yeah. IIT is very popular in the Bay
very
Area, especially where I am. I feel like
I can, yeah, I get it. So, we already have a lot of folks from IITs working in the US, and similar to that, you have also a lot of founders in the startup ecosystem who are from those schools. So there is definitely, it gives you a little bit of an edge. And if you look at the stats on, what is the founder demographic when they get funded, a lot of the sort of, more successful founders have come from those institutes. Hence, you see a lot of VCs backing that up. Again, it's a kind of a school where you only get, you get a seat if you've been in the top three, 2000 in terms of the entrance test that happens every year, and it's one of the toughest globally. So I get how sometimes investors do want to filter that out. However, I think personally, what when I come across a founder, I think look at a few things. One is that if I had to, obviously, degree and track record and which institute they come from, well noted if they are from a great institute. But what really matters is what is their right to win in the segment or in the market that they've chosen. And so, for example, if a founder is wanting to build something in the health tech space or in the experiences space, have they worked at a startup or worked at a business which was building in that space? I think that's definitely a plus. Have they worked in a high growth startup before? So they're aware of how startups function, how are how are tech products essentially launched? Do they have a network, or do they have um, um, ability to hire good talent? That is again very important. So I think as an ecosystem, and even personally, I think we moved beyond just looking at like a tag of where you come from. Great if you come from an IIT, but also at the same time get more into specifics and figure out what's your right to win. Have you built in that market before? Are you able to hire good talent? Do you have some insights for that particular space, which gives you an edge over any other founder building in that space? So I think those are important things, and people are now also trying to look deeper into also the founder personality. What's the relationship between, if it's a multi-founder team, like if there are two or three founders, what's the relationship? How do they know each other? Will they work well together in future or not? And um, I think all of those are really important. And I think the significance also changes at which stage you're coming. If you're investing very early on, there's a lot of sort of all of this that need to be done. If you're investing in a startup which is 3 years, 4 years into operations, you can also judge some of that by the track record of the startup, by figuring out which founder is doing what, and has contributed in what way, and use that to also build on your on the thesis or the POV that you have on the founder.
In your opinion, like which global company, obviously like beyond like Conviviality Ventures, you feel like are doing a great moves in like entering the India ecosystem compared to like some of their competitors?
You mean corporates or like
Like
VCs?
a corporate basically. Like what are some like I guess like well-known US brand you feel like did a really great job on like localizing um like like the localization part of like entering a different market?
Um, you mean more from a product perspective, right? Not just
Yeah,
investing.
from like product or like just in general or like industry too,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. So see, I think all the the magnificent seven that you have, a lot of these also are sort of huge in India.
Mhm,
Google, Facebook, Instagram. I heard Instagram crossed 600 million sort of monthly active users.
mhm,
That's, I think, superbly sort of a high number. So all of the sort of the big four or the big five tech are doing significantly well in India. I think it's also an ecosystem which is open to getting products from there, and happily sort of doing that. A lot of F&B brands, if you take like McDonald's or Starbucks, significant penetration in India and significant customization. Like McDonald's, is present everywhere in India. Again, there is nothing common in the menu that McDonald's serves in the US and in India. They totally customized it, whether
mhm,
it's taste, price point, and it's worked superbly well. So some of these F&B brands, including Starbucks, they found an Indian partner in the Tatas and built out a great sort of story, because India was primarily a tea drinking nation. A lot of
mhm.
us were drinking tea, and then with Starbucks, etc., people are now sort of graduating to coffee. So Starbucks has done really well, and then on the back of that, now you have a bunch of coffee focused Indian startups trying to build in that space, whether it's retail, online, offline. So that's sort of another example. A lot of the you know, investment banks, since I come from investment banking, a lot of the global, whether it's Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, all exist in India, are doing significantly well in that space. So yeah, the bunch of these examples where a lot of success has been found. I think key is to make sure you don't treat it like every other market. It's a little bit different. Start slow and then gradually sort of figure out what's working and then double down on that. I think those sort of principles and strategies work for India.
Do you feel like in the future, like would you see like a Conviviality venture to go into like the Indian drink market like they did like in like they have invested in like some of these drinks in like the US or like in China, but like would you say like this would be like one part of the strategy, or would
Yeah.
you see it more of like the tradition, like not the tradition but like the current strategy, which is like more focusing on like other ways of like the future of entertainment or like
Yeah.
travel?
No, I mean, although we've not done any drinks focused investment in
Mhm,
India, I wouldn't, I'm not completely closed to the opportunity. I think for drinks and for especially alcoholic drinks, what we're looking for is, a product which is extremely differentiated, or there is some sort of, differentiation or innovation in terms of the product or how they make it or how they're able to sell it or how they're able to market it. I think if we see something significantly happening in any of these categories, we're sort of happy to take a look and take deep interest. Another category is that in India, because and one theme which is not just common for drinks but for any consumer categories, there's a lot of 10 years, 15 years back, if I give you an Indian product versus a product made in the US, people would automatically assume that the US or the American product is better than the Indian product. But with the younger folks, being especially proud about it's come from India, you have a lot of Indian brands who tell the story of India, even spirits which are telling you, okay, this is brewed in India or this is made in India. People have a lot of pride in consuming that, and also sharing that with their with their friends and family. And so Indian whiskies, for example, Indian single malts, they are doing exceptionally well, not just in India but globally. So there is a lot of innovation happening on the ground, focused on Indian spirits and Indian stories. So that's also something that we continuously track. And as long as there's innovation and differentiation in the way they're thinking about it, always happy to sort of partner with those kind of companies.
Mm. From my understanding, in India have like a lot of different languages and like subculture. Do you feel like when you're launching a strategy or launching a product in one subsector, it's like having like a more of like an advantage to go to the entire India, or like do you feel like it's more of like a segmented like I mean just
Yeah,
like yeah, basically a more fragmented like play in the entire India
yeah.
ecosystem?
Right. So definitely, I think in the way I've seen, companies, whether it's in the portfolio company or just based on my research play out, is everyone aims for a pan India product. So it's not like some startup will come to you and say they're going to only sell this in South India. So the vision and the ultimate aim is to sell pan India, but at the same time, I think founders are smart enough, or even when we are working with founders, I think the execution has to be at least in products.
Mhm.
Actual products we're selling a little bit offline. There's a little bit of retail also involved. The execution needs to be a little bit more regional. You say that you will first capture Western India, South India, because just to take the example of retail, like in US, you have Target and Whole Foods, which have branches all across the US, right? We don't have super large scale, retail outlets. Uh, Retail industry or grocery is still very fragmented, so it needs to be more sort of bottom up, ground up. And so it helps, and I would personally want the founder to think about it, piece by piece versus trying to do
Mhm.
everything together. Especially in categories like food and beverages, where the taste, etc., are so specific to the state that you're in, that you may need to customize. Say if you're going from southern India to northern India, etc. So makes sense. Like you rightly mentioned, it's fragmented. It's like a collection of many cultures living together. So there is a fair bit of customization between where you go from north to south or south to north.
Hmm. Okay, so if you and I are starting a company, let's call it like, I want to like stay away from your current portfolio so that we don't get into trouble. So like, if you and I are starting, call it like a makeup company or like a beauty brand, how would you suggest us to like go to market in India? Let's say we're like doing an eyeshadow or something.
Yeah. By the way, a great pick on the sector. Makeup is doing really well in India. So,
I'm
uh,
sure.
yeah. So it's a category. A lot of good startups have been built in that space. I think first is to have just a kick-ass product, a product which is different from all the ones that exist, whether
Mhm.
it's in terms of the texture or the way it looks, or the way it's packaged. All of it. It needs to be a great product, because this category also is, we've seen a lot of brands come up in the space. Product has to be good. I think the easiest way would be to figure out the product, if possible. Then work with these vertical e-commerce platforms that exist. So we have something called Nika in India, which where all skincare, makeup, etc. is sold.
Mhm.
You figure out, deal with them. With them, there is possibility to get into at least the top four cities on day one. Also start building like a social media around it. If like I was mentioning earlier, if it's possible to get a great you know celebrity who can become an investor, and work with them to use some of their social leverage to market it. That's also a great model that has worked for a lot of startups in this space. So have a great sort of social marketing angle, whether it's influencers or celebrities, and then sort of start selling on the platform. I would focus first on online, for a while till I reach a certain sort of milestone in scale, and then figure out offline. It would require maybe at least two rounds of funding. So use, build a great, prototype of a product, figure out who you are selling to, at what price point you're selling to, build that story, use it to raise your first round of funding. Get a great co-founder. I think it's very important. It's easier to do it with someone than do it all alone. I would always, I've seen so many founder journeys. I always recommend to have a great partner. It's with complementary skill sets, so you're able to sort of balance everything out. And yeah, those are some of the tips that sort of come to mind at this point.
I wonder, this is like such a niche topic, but like
Yeah.
I feel like in China, like there's a lot of people in the past, people would shop for like these like iconic US or like foreign brand, but nowadays
Mm.
there's like a major shift of like people having more trust in the smaller up and coming local brands. Does that happen in India, or like do you feel like people are more leaning towards like a global brand that with like a lot of like already current
No, no, I think
brand.
this was very much the case, yeah, very much the case 10, 15 years back. But now there's a lot of, I think a lot of Indian brands. And actually, that's like a broader theme for anyone investing in the consumer space in India, that
Mhm,
a lot of the market in every category that you pick was, firstly, a lot of it was unorganized, which means some local, not even branded stuff was getting sold. Then
mhm,
came a phase where all the international brands started coming in, so people started buying those. So people started buying branded versus unbranded stuff, and they
mhm,
thought anything branded which has a English sounding name is great, and that's what we should trust, and that's a great quality. Honestly, that was the case. And but I would say in the last 10 years or so, five to 10 years, that's not, people are now very proud about the Indian heritage. We have full sort of, we've had a few examples where whether it's makeup or skincare or apparel or luxury, or like travel bags, etc., where Indian brands have come up who have an entirely Indian story, and people are starting to trust that. So that's a great theme to play on. You know, anyone looking to start, I would say, pick up a consumer space, figure out how much of it was unorganized, and start thinking about building an Indian first brand for that space. And when I say Indian, it doesn't have to be like, playing into the Indian stereotypical mindset. It can be still global, in the sense that it's targeting a high quality. It can also in some cases be exported. There are
mhm.
people in other countries wanting to sort of associate themselves with those brands. So it's, I think it's that phase where we have founders who can build sort of amazing products, and there are consumers who won't mind paying a premium even for an Indian brand.
Would you say, I guess, like, on the other hand, like, would you so when I was, like, looking into, like, the, makeup space in China, I feel like a lot of it were, there were a lot of, like, community-based selling, so, like, the micro-influencers and, like, a community-based, selling, like, people are buying from, like, a WeChat group or something. Would the same thing happening in India? Like, basically the micro community or, like, micro-influencer movement and like the community selling.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, it's e-commerce model that
Mhm,
sort of flourished. I would say a few years back. There are a bunch of companies which came out through that. There's an Indian company
mhm,
called Meesho, which again targeted the middle India, and they use the same strategy where they said that there's a micro influencers in a small town who everyone sort of looks up to, or she's
mhm,
maybe well connected to everyone, and use that person as a seller or influencer to influence them. Started off
mhm,
with that, but now as they've grown, as they've scaled, they've also transformed it to a full-fledged horizontal e-commerce platform. So it works in those markets, but eventually then they turn into, I would say, a more horizontal e-commerce platform with brands, etc., coming in. So it's worked in general sort of categories, and I would say low AOV, low selling price products. It doesn't work as smoothly, I would say, in sort of makeup or large products. What works in makeup is, again, having influencers which have followers on Instagram, and I think those
mhm.
strategies have worked very well for Nika, which is again a vertical e-commerce platform in that space.
Totally. Okay, so we're at the last part of the interview, and hi Raj, and he have a question on like what are your takes on the Web3 space in India?
Interesting. I just, spoke this morning with another fellow investor who invests in the Web3 space. I think for Perno or for Conviviality Ventures, it's a space that we spent a bit of time on in, I think, 2022, 2023. But we felt like the consumer adoption is still not as significant, especially in India. So we think it'll grow, but we want to wait till we see significant consumer adoption to be able to do something then meaningful with some of our brands. So that's my limited take on that space. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so we're at the last 1 minute fire run segment. Okay, so what's your favorite book?
Oh, my favorite book. Okay. I don't have a favorite book, but I'll take the name of the one that I'm currently reading. So I'm reading Influence Empire by Lolo. It's a story on the founder of Tencent and how Tencent grew in China. And it's recent, so they will also hopefully talk about what's the current state now of high growth tech companies in China. So I've read about, one third of it looks, sounds, and reads very smoothly, very interesting. So eager to finish that over this weekend. Yeah.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Oh, wow. There's um, I would say, I've been very lucky with great managers, great bosses throughout my career, whether it's Nomura or my current boss, Stefan. But but if I had to pick like one person who's had the most impact, I think it would be like my mom.
Mhm.
Um, I grew up in a household where not a lot of folks, worked. They had all their small businesses, etc. So, and definitely not a lot of females who studied and then went out to work. So, and she was one of the folks that sort of pushed me, to always aim higher. So I would say without her, I wouldn't be where I am. So she has had the most impact, yeah, personally and professionally.
Amazing. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Wow. So, like living or
It's your party.
okay. I would honestly love to invite Shah Rukh Khan. He's an Indian
Mhm.
Bollywood actor. One of the biggest superstars in the country. He's been at it for the last 20, 30 years. So, firstly, I'm a fan, so I would love to meet and spend time with him. And secondly, would be great to understand how do you stay at the top of your game. For so many years
Mhm.
in a career which is so tough. So, always would love to have a coffee or a dinner with him.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Oh, outside of work, these days it's with my 5-year-old, either coloring books with crayons or building Lego. And so that's where I think most of my time goes. I also joined a book club recently, so and we have a target of finishing 4 books every quarter. So
Oh wow.
the time remains after that. I spend reading most. I just
Okay.
want to get into a habit where I'm back to reading versus this consumption digitally. So it's been an interesting quarter, I would say.
For sure. I feel like getting inspiration from like I really love all these like actually physical books. I don't know, like I feel like have touching
Same
the
here.
physical books are like a lot more satisfying than like if you read them digitally. But well, Sonam, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun chat.
No, great for likewise for me. Great chat. I think very interesting questions. Grace made me think a lot and retrospect. But glad that we could do this.
Amazing. Okay, let me quickly end stream.